Hola, ¿cómo están a todos? Bienvenidos a la sexta edición de la Semana de la Gastronomía Coreana. Estamos acá justo con Shin Kim, que es una chef en Nueva York. Yo tuve el gusto de trabajar con ella en el año 2017, en la tercera edición de la Semana de la Gastronomía Coreana en Argentina. Este, Vamos a hacer la entrevista en inglés porque se siente mucho más cómoda ella justamente con el inglés. Uh, Chef, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. It's great to be here. Although I can't see you, I am so happy that we are able to have this meeting, have a little conversation with Bomsu today. I was in Buenos Aires 4 years ago, and we did the Korean Food Festival, and had Korean dinner at Sheraton Hotel. And we also had Korean cooking demonstrations and lessons and introductions in cooking schools, and had a meeting with reporters. And it was an honor to be able to go to Buenos Aires and meet with Argentinians and introduce Korean food. So it's it really is a special memory for me, that I was there 4 years ago, and now circling back 4 years later during this time, to be able to have a chat with Pomsu. Nice to meet
Been
you.
such nice to meet you back again. Like, I remember it was really hectic that moment. Yeah, I do remember a few moments. If I am not mistaken, we did galbijjim, right? That time.
Oh my God.
You do remember that one, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was, the dinner itself was, I believe it was 3-day event, but
Yeah.
there was a long conversation back and
Yeah.
forth before we even went to Argentina,
Yeah.
and we talked about different ingredients that we would need. We prepared some from here, but mostly the ingredients were sourced locally.
Yeah.
And the meat was one thing, but there were other ingredients that um, were different.
Yeah.
That
I
were
do remember that.
different,
Yeah.
to say the least. So, like, even we were communicating in English, but there were some differences in the same ingredients,
Yeah.
or what I thought was one thing, but it was another thing.
Mm.
It was just challenging because I've never been to, obviously, Argentina, and and so there were things that we had to kind of make do on
Yeah.
site. And I was so glad, Pomsi, you were there to kind of help bridge the gap of understanding, not just the language, but the culinary understanding of two different cultures. So
Yeah.
I learned a lot. And I really appreciated the chef who worked with me, the chef and his team, and Pomsu, and I'm glad we pulled through and got it done.
Yeah.
But yeah, including that part, it was a very special memory for me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it the event itself was great, actually. I mean, it turned out to be pretty good. I remember that. But I mean, that was the first time I was working with an American chef,
Mm-hmm.
because the previous year there were obviously two Korean chefs from Korea. They were chefs from Chosun Hotel, and they did understand. They brought ingredients from Korea.
Mm-hmm.
But you guys, ella vino con su hermano. She came here with her sister. They were, both of them were a team. You relied solely on like local produces. I
Right.
remember that. Yeah,
Right.
that was a difference with the Korean chefs the previous year.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, being that challenging, I think was like a lot more how can I say it? I think it was like a better experience, I think, because we overcame difficulties, and obviously we did have some challenges, but the result was, I think, was a lot better than the previous year, in my opinion. Um, but yeah, that was, if I'm not mistaken, what was it,
It was
March or
April.
April? April,
April.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I went to Australia a month after that. I went there. I went to Australia in May, and
Uh-huh.
that was a part of my life where I wasn't expecting anything, because I was about to leave Argentina. I wanted to go to New York. Actually, I couldn't go to New York, so I went to Australia.
You had
Australia
an
itself was,
adventure.
yeah. That year was crazy. That year was crazy. I even remember, I think it was the after the first night, we were all of us like having a beer at the lounge, and I was like so worried, not about the events, because I wasn't really worried about the event at the moment, but more about me going to Australia. And I was asking, like, what is it like to live in an English speaking country? What should I expect? And I remember you guys telling me that you had no idea, because like you didn't know what Australia was actually. Yeah. Yeah, but like here we are. Went to Australia, came back. You kept on going. Ella tiene un proyecto. Ella también promueve la gastronomía coreana en Estados Unidos. Se llama Panchan Story. También da lecciones, como programas cortos pero intensos de la gastronomía coreana. Can you tell me about the Panchan Story? How is it going?
So I run Korean cooking studio Banchan Story. We started out, doing in-person Korean cooking classes in the studio. That expanded into more of a catering with some cooking classes. And the catering part was really going well. And that was part Korean, but it got a lot more of just general catering. And I infused a lot of Korean elements into it. And we're going to talk about this a little later, but
Yeah.
within that studio name, I also published my first cookbook 4 years ago. I think it was right before I went
Yeah.
to Argentina. And with the time that it was this year, I worked on my second cookbook this year. So that became my major project.
Right.
So I've been doing that in Manhattan, and I thought it was time for growth this year, but it took a little different turn.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's what I've been up to. How is it going in Argentina? Like, I heard
Oh,
that Korean food has been really doing well since I was there,
yeah.
and then how is it going now? What's going on?
So you came here 2017, and I left here 2017, but it turns out that in 2018 everything changed. There were restaurants opening in downtown or Palermo, outside of our neighborhood, like our K-town.
Right.
Yeah. So Korean food it's becoming a staple now. Even though Japanese food is still like the most important or the most recognizable Asian cuisine here in Argentina, Korean food is really becoming, it's really becoming popular within Argentinians. I was honestly not expecting that it's so like on this scale, because it's really big. Last year was there was an event, like it was like basically like a Korean Food Week. So this is what we're doing now. This is happening now, basically, which is basically reuniting all the Korean restaurants in Buenos Aires and introducing to locals here, basically. And the response was really good, actually. Like all restaurants were full all the whole week, reservations, they were full all the time. What happens now because of this pandemic, I'm not really sure. But we're relying, basically on online courses. I'm relying on online courses. But restaurants are obviously doing more like takeaway services. I think that's a good thing because it's easier for people, because people they are ordering food, delivery basically, and also they are tired of the everyday thing, so they are trying new stuff. Korean is amongst one of them. I'm giving classes basically, and I'm doing Instagram lives through the Korean Culture Center, and I can see there is a group of people that are cooking Korean food every week because I am basically presenting a whole different recipe every week,
Right, right. Something different they can try at home.
Exactly, because people basically they are tired of the everyday stuff. We have been on lockdown since March. We've done everything, yeah, and it happens to me as well, So yeah, I think that's a major change here. People they are really interested in Korean food nowadays, I think.
So yeah, I heard that the Korean food is going really well up until early this year, and I was there for a week. And I don't know too many places in Buenos Aires, but I know Palermo. And it's like a really hip place that I had a dinner or two there, and I remember, it was really nice, hip, like Manhattan Soho type of environment.
Exactly.
I just I didn't see any Korean restaurants, but now when you say that, it's like, wow, I like next time I go, I have to go there.
Yeah, exactly. People they started making kimchi at home.
That's amazing. I think that's amazing.
It grew that much. Yeah, it grew that much. Before, like if you ask a local here, an Argentinian, if they knew about Korean food or if they knew about kimchi, like maybe 1 out of 10 will tell me like they knew what Korean food was. But now I can see that at least half of them know or heard about it. They know what kimchi is, they know what bulgogi, bibimbap is, so it changed a lot in that sense, I think,
Right. So I remember a few years back, it's like, by then people already knew what kimchi was, what bibimbap was. I didn't have to explain, right? Whereas, like so many years ago, I had to explain what kimchi was. And then I would get, so is that like spicy sauerkraut kind of response, right? So people's understanding have been just increasing, and the interest, and even a couple of years ago, people would come to me after a cooking class, and they would ask for a tip to make kimchi. Not because they've never done it, they were already making it at home. They wanted to know if I was doing it in any different way, so exactly. I think there is a lot more room to grow in Argentina. And, I'm hoping that in a few years, you don't even have to explain kimchi to anyone there, right? Exactly. So I think that would be great. And like you said, in New York, since the lockdown, like when everything was shut down, there wasn't anything going on, but then slowly people figured it out. And especially Korean restaurants, I think they're very smart about it, that not only did they start offering takeout menus and deliveries, sorry, my my cat had it. Like, he can't stand it anymore. But anyway, so I think the Korean restaurants were very smart. Not only did they start offering takeout menus and delivery menus, but also they started coming out with weekly meal kits.
Oh,
So
okay.
it
Yeah, I've seen
is
that.
mostly cooked, but it may require a little bit more of heating.
Yeah.
So, every week, or you could participate every week, or, whenever you want to, but you will get a few meals out of it. And it's, pretty much almost prepared
Yeah.
Korean feast for the
Yeah.
family.
Exactly.
So I think they're very smart about that. And then once the lockdown got eased and, they could open the restaurants again. Right
Yeah.
now, New York is at 25% inside capacity,
Okay.
and they're still doing outdoor seatings.
Yeah.
And it's getting cold in New
Yeah,
York.
exactly.
So
Exactly. Yeah.
and they're trying to figure out, what kind of how they could just heat up the tent, or add the heat lamp or something. But over the summer, again, some people figured out that they could make it a really like a 포장마차 in Korea.
Oh, that's
So, Korea already has that kind of culinary
Exactly.
culture
Yeah.
where it's already, there are restaurants outside with a giant tent, right?
Exactly.
So they brought that concept to New
Oh,
York,
okay.
and they put up a giant tent with the dividers in between the tables.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you didn't know, you would think that it's a big festival. People
Yeah,
would come
exactly.
out and just have a meal. And
Mhm.
so in that sense, Koreans are very flexible and adaptable in figuring out how to make it work.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's quality Koreans. We Koreans have, we read up early. 'Cause I was actually going to ask you if you had any advice, like New York. I really love New York because they are. I always say this, but I've been to quite a few cities around the world, but New York, food-wise, culinary-wise, is really the mecca, I think. It's really advanced compared to other parts of the world. And I always took New York as an example, of what I could do if I had a restaurant. What should I do when I open my restaurant? And I would take examples of Korean restaurants or just restaurants in general in New York. What's your advice? Like, what should Korean restaurants or just restaurants in general in Argentina should do, in your opinion?
That's a loaded question.
What steps should we take to overcome this? Like, how can we make this different? Would be the question. Like you said, we do, because we do have tables outside. There are tables outside. They are restricted, but we don't have like indoor sitting. None of that. But the idea of 포장마차, for instance, never came to my mind, honestly.
I don't know how many restaurants can wait until this is, behind us, because, like, everyone says different. All doctors are saying different things about the vaccine. So the restaurants who have to deal with this are dealing with this with their ideas. And I thought, like you, 포장마차, that like outdoor tented restaurants are, a great alternative to what you have, right? But that also comes with the government regulations.
Exactly.
That they allow the restaurants, they understand that it's a difficult situation, so they allow that to happen. And also, I think it was maybe this week, the New York City government allowed restaurants to charge 10% more to the tip. So it's called, I think it's called recovery fee or something like that. So, it costs more to source and maintain the staff, right? So, but at the same time, everyone's, going through some sort of difficulty, right?
Exactly.
So some people are just downright, hard hit, whereas other people are just more inconvenienced, right? So it's hard to say, what applies in New York can apply in Argentina, but if that, like if people are still going to restaurants to eat outside, and I mean, it's actually a great time for Argentina, because you guys are having, like it's going into the hot season, right? Summer season. So I think there was more of like upbeat hope of enjoying the restaurant scenes outside. Now we're we're on the other end of the spectrum, sort of like things are getting, it's chilly, and like there's a second wave or third wave, whatever you want to call it. So I think meal kits are still applicable, because a lot of people are not back to going to work every day. It's a different situation where, like most people are still working from home, and you're still facing a whole lot of your family members every day, 24/7. Your kids may go to school, or they may not, or they may go a couple of times a week. So wherever you are, it's all different situation, but you're seeing a lot of family members a lot more than before. And to have to cook for your family, or someone has to cook to make make the meals. And I think it's a nice offer to have that option available. So like it could be Korean families, but also if it's advertised to the people who are interested in different cuisines, this could be a great way to, experience and try Korean food at home.
It comes to my mind because sharing is a really important ingredient in Korean food.
Right.
So I think that's a really good option. And another question I have, so what about, like, I live in Argentina, I've been to New York, I've been to Australia. All these three countries share one thing, which is that they were founded by immigrants, basically. What do you think it's the best way to introduce Korean food to locals here? Because we are on the first steps, basically. So what steps should we take?
I think it's a great start. Well, you're saying it's first phase, but also I'm seeing the progress from a few years ago. So I think it's already in a great, the right direction.
All right,
People already know about bibimbap. Like what do Argentinians know about Korean food? So they know a few names of the dishes, popular dishes. So what comes to their mind, like when you say Korean food now?
Korean food, the first thing it's fermented food, obviously kimchi. The fact that it's really tasty, the fact that it's different, the fact that we share things, and the fact that it has been like a closed thing for locals, because back in the days, locals they just couldn't come to a Korean restaurant because
Mhm.
the owners wouldn't let that happen. But now owners are actually looking for locals to come because Koreans are not going to Korean restaurants as much as we did before. Because
Right.
it happens to me. Yeah, it happens to me. I really don't go out to Korean restaurants,
Because you can
honestly.
make them.
Exactly. Yeah, because I
Right.
can make them. And it happens to my friends as well. We don't feel the need to go to Korean restaurant anymore, and the younger generations as well. So they are looking for locals to actually come. Opening our doors was the first and the most important step,
Right.
for to introduce actual Korean food to locals here, I think, in my opinion.
I think
Yeah.
that's when local people start going to Korean restaurants and they find that, oh, this is actually very tasty,
Mm.
and it's like a different elements to it. In New York, it started from barbecue meats, right?
Oh,
Because
okay.
the table side grilling was
Uh-huh.
a whole different concept, right? When New Yorkers think barbecue, it's outdoor grill.
Uh-huh.
Koreans do it inside, right? I think
Inside, yeah.
it's a little different
Yeah.
in Argentina. But then when they go to a Korean restaurant, they see a whole array of little side dishes,
Yeah.
and they really enjoy that. Like, what is that? What is that? Right? And
Exactly.
then they try different dishes, and that's how they got familiar with Korean food, and they became aware of it. And then from there, when you eat a lot of it, and then you kind of get into kimchi, right? Like at first,
Exactly.
it was an acquired taste, but
Yeah.
then eventually it's like, wait, I miss kimchi, right? Like, where
Yeah.
could I
Yeah.
have some? And then you start looking for it in stores, like, wait a minute, like if that whole like little jar is
Mm-hmm.
$10, is there any way to make them, right? And then they
Yeah. Yeah.
start
Exactly.
making, learning and looking up on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, and like looking for classes to take. So I think that there is like a gradual kind of interest, progression of
Yeah.
interest, right?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
they go out to not necessarily, like one type of Korean restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
And what I see also in New York that's different from a few years ago is
Mm-hmm.
like maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was mostly barbecue restaurants in New York.
Okay. Yeah.
But over the last 5, 7 years, there's like a fine dining Korean restaurant. There's
Exactly. Yeah.
fusion Korean restaurant. There's a
Exactly.
Korean restaurant that specializes in bar food. Like how
Oh.
Koreans like to drink. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very like nightlife
Yeah.
focused, but it's very food heavy
Yeah.
restaurant. And also there are Korean restaurants that focus on home style cooking restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really define Korean food as in like one thing.
Yeah.
So, first it used to be just, oh, like I thought you just
Mm-hmm.
had barbecue with like
Yeah.
side dishes, right?
Yeah.
It's not that anymore. So I think that understanding has expanded. So to me, in a long-winded way,
Yeah.
just I think it's what you're doing is amazing. That you're
Mm.
doing cooking classes, make it more approachable.
Yeah.
Um, that it's not just for Korean people, or
Yeah.
like it's not just the people with like special ingredients that make
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Korean restaurants. And it goes back to 4 years ago. I am a big proponent of using local
Yeah.
ingredients as much as possible. Of course, there are some fermented sauces and other ingredients that um, you need to make Korean
Yeah.
food, but the protein or the vegetables and
Mm-hmm.
fruits, you can make use of a lot of
Exactly.
local ingredients that are
Global.
fresh
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
seasonal, right? I think with that, you can have all kinds of, you can make all kinds of Korean food
Yeah.
and
I mean,
make it
this
really tasty.
really tasty. Yeah. I mean, and one thing I really noticed about Korean food, like what the big interest was is that it's really like nutritional, basically. Like Korean food is really nutritional. Fermented food is really like good for your health, basically. And I found out, I understood that because now, obviously nowadays there are many people that just don't eat meat anymore, and Argentina is a really heavy consumer of meat.
Right.
But now, yeah, I mean, there are now people that are looking for vegetarians or vegan options, and they found in Korean food that like you didn't really necessarily like had to have meat to enjoy a meal. Like bibimbap itself, it's a mixture, it's a conjunction of many different of ingredients, basically. And if you just want to skip meat, you can make a different thing. You know, I had a class Friday night. That class was to some guys in San Francisco. So I made a bulgogi stew, basically. And I explained to them, like, you don't really need meat to make bulgogi. Like, if you change meat to basically mushrooms, well, you can have a like exactly. So Korean food is really flexible in that, I think.
Right.
Yeah. It's hard in Argentina. Like, if you go to an asado but you don't have meat, you can't like you can't make a whole. You can actually make a whole asado just with vegetables, but like it's not the point, kind of. Yeah, food is really flexible, like Buddhist cuisine, basically. It's totally like it's a totally different thing, I think. In Korean food, like it's tasty, is really healthy, and has no like meat contents. You know, no nothing that comes from animals, and it's really good. Still good. You know, it's a really enjoyable thing. I think that Korean food, it's not only healthy for the person that eats it, but like you can create like you create a consciousness about Korean food, like food itself. I think, you know, food can be different. Food can be adaptable to what you want, to what you need. You know, yeah, that's that's the thing I realized with the classes, basically. You know, I'm using just local ingredients. You know, for instance, chotgal. You know, not many Argentinians have access to chotgal. You know, so I like, you know, guys, like if you don't have that, you can make a natural chotgal. Like you can use just tashima, tashima, and shiitake mushrooms. You know, you can make a broth out of that, and bam, you there you have a vegan, easy to make.
That's actually chotgal, two very important in vegan cuisine in Korea.
Exactly. And you don't really need fermented fish or fermented shrimps to make kimchi, for example. You know, one thing I realized when I had this kimchi making class was that most of the people were like, "Can I use Thai fermented fish sauce?" Like, I was like, "Yeah, you can use that. It won't be exactly the same, but if you go to a Buddhist temple in Korea, they make it with you know, shiitake mushrooms and kombu seaweed, basically, and you know, you can have kimchi with that. You know, I think that Korean food here is changing also the way people eat. You know, because it's not something like special. You know, it's a whole culture doing it like that, basically. And I think that people actually can find that out during this week as well. You know, depending on what your need, on your dietary requirements, you can like, there are 32 restaurants this year. There are 32 restaurants, which are almost all the restaurants in Buenos Aires, basically. You know, just 32 restaurants. You know, I think you have 32 just in Flushing. You know, I think you have more than 32.
No, but I mean, considering what I've heard, you know, back when 4 years ago, I think that's a great number.
Yeah, I mean, 32 restaurants, that's a lot of restaurants. You know, that's a lot of restaurants, and I think half of them are open to locals here.
Mm-hmm.
So people, they do have a really broad, share. They can find, what they want, what they need. They have 7 days, 14 meals to actually enjoy everything different. They can just go online and find out that Korean restaurants, they offer you a whole different thing. They can offer you
Right.
everything different. It goes from fresh food, stews, like soups, Korean barbecue, healthy food, fusionized, like fusion food.
Right.
It changed a lot in that way. I think it really did.
Right. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
amazing to hear.
yeah.
So yeah, and what you said about, different aspects of Korean food, and I think we are really coming to understand actually that, Korean food can be a lot of like smoky barbecues and,
Mm,
sharing and big parties and all that, but it is also a very vegetable focused
mm-hmm,
cuisine. And it's recently been sort of introduced to people outside of Korea
mm-hmm.
because, like more people are interested in vegetarian or vegan or, something just like healthier for their
Yeah.
body. And it's, to a lot of people, it's surprising to hear that Korea has a long culture of veganism.
Mm-hmm.
There was about 1,000 years
Yeah.
where Buddhism was a national religion,
Yeah.
meaning that meat was
Exactly.
forbidden for most
Mm-hmm.
people, right? So, and carrying that culture, the Buddhists now, they are sharing their secrets of,
Yeah.
how to ferment and, cook with all kinds of herbs and vegetables and
Mm-hmm.
how
Yeah.
they preserve, not just making
Exactly.
kimchi, but, a whole lot of different ways of preserving
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
vegetables. And what's amazing about the Buddhist cuisine is they don't even use garlic or onion.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, so all these like allium, pungent allium
Yeah.
vegetables are forbidden. But when you taste it, it's very refreshing, but you're not
Exactly.
really missing any
Mm-hmm.
element of flavor. So,
Exactly.
and I
Yeah.
think the philosophy behind it also is really, that really resonated with me too. That
Mm-hmm.
it's basically the human beings are also a part of nature, and you are
Mm-hmm.
treating the ingredients as another element of the nature. So I really have respect for
Mm-hmm.
the Korean Buddhist cuisine, and I try to learn about it as much as I can. Um, so I think that's a great way to sort of adapt in your cooking
Exactly.
repertoire. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and also, I don't know how it is in Argentina, but
Mm.
we have a saying, quarantine 15. Um,
What does it mean?
what that means is that, everyone's basically locked up at home, cooking
Uh-huh.
and just eating at home, whatever, either cooking or takeaways or whatnot. So, and not many opportunities to go outside. So
Uh-huh.
they're gaining 15 pounds during quarantine.
Oh.
I think especially in the beginning, when people just don't know what's going to happen and what's going
Mm-hmm.
on, they look for comfort food, and a lot of
Exactly.
times comfort food tastes great, but you
Yeah.
can put on
Yeah.
some serious calories. So
Yeah.
so it's like it's great to have that mac and cheese and
Uh-huh.
fried chicken,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also kind of have to manage what's good for your body too. So I think
Exactly.
in Korean food, I cook more and more with a lot of vegetables, and like you
Mm-hmm.
said, in Korean food, bulgogi doesn't have to be meat, right?
Mhm.
Or bulgogi could be beef, chicken, or fish, or it could be
Yeah.
vegetables, right?
Mhm.
So it's a very sauce or seasoning driven food. So you can change up different ingredients and make it vegetarian, make it vegan, or make it whatever you want it to be, right? I think that's why it's so adaptable to local ingredients.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
So,
anyone can
so
have great Korean food.
yeah, I do have a question. Out of the three, like let's call them mother sauces, like gochujang, doenjang, and kanjang, which one is your favorite to use?
I think if you can get good kanjang,
Yeah.
I think that's one I'll take, because that then you can make kimchi taste great without
Oh,
using the fish
really?
sauce.
Oh, with kanjang?
Yes.
Oh, I never thought about that.
So and I don't know what it's like in Argentina, like, what kind of accessibility you have to the Korean ingredients still.
Yeah.
But I think kanjang would be important to me. I mean, here now, like even Korean grocery stores, they deliver now,
Oh,
and
okay.
on Amazon, you can get a lot of Korean ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
So both commercial brands and some artisanal brands. So
Yeah.
if you can get kanjang, that could be very widely used.
Yeah.
Gochujang, I love it, but
Mm-hmm.
and that's also like the spicy food. It can be addictive. I try not to have like so much every
Oh, okay.
day.
Yeah.
And doenjang, it's like the doenjang jjigae is great. Like I use it for different sauces, but I think it still comes to kanjang.
Mm-hmm.
Like
So
if you
you,
can get the traditionally made, like just soy sauce, salt, and water,
yeah.
I
Yeah,
think that's the
exactly.
key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So using kanjang, can you, like for the upcoming summer here in Argentina, using kanjang, can you share me a recipe you would make for the
Uh,
summer using kanjang?
Using kanjang.
It's a tricky question, right? It's a hard question.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Can I just do maybe like a little tips for summer Korean recipe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
For
So,
you have an upcoming book, right?
huh?
Your new book.
Yes.
Like share us a recipe from your book using kanjang. What about that?
Oh. Wait, I'll come back to that.
Okay.
Wait, I can't just remember like top of my head.
Oh, you
I
can
mean,
think about
kanjang
it.
is everywhere. Like if someone asks for, it's like, oh, I'm looking for a great vegetarian, vegan cookbook, but
Mm-hmm.
without soy sauce or soy protein. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I understand that. I
yeah, it's
understand that.
like it's everywhere, and like so I have a cookbook coming up, Korean vegetarian cooking, I'm
Okay.
appropriately, um,
Okay.
and I have about 7 kimchi recipes,
Oh,
and they're all there's like no fish sauce,
okay.
obviously.
And you use
It's all
kanjang for it.
vegetarian or vegan, and the major replacement for soy sauce, for fish sauce, is the naturally made soy sauce.
Oh, wow. Wow. Now
So
I should apply that. I should try that. I never thought about replacing fish sauce with kanjang. I never
yeah,
thought about that. And
so
honestly, I never thought it was going to be possible.
it so yeah, make sure you get, if you can't get like the traditionally made Korean
Mm-hmm.
soy sauce, at least look for like the purest one that doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
like additives
Additive, yeah,
to it.
exactly, additive.
So I think that's the key. And actually, you know, what's great, what will be great for summer recipe is, you know, making kimchi is like, it will open doors to your like whole culinary repertoire, where you can make kimchi with a lot of different vegetables. Like you don't need to, you know, pick the napa cabbage that, you know, like the most popular, or the Korean radish to make kimchi, right? You can sort of look through what you have and in your own, you know, farmer's market, or you know, like what's in season, right? And make kimchi out of it. And another great thing that you can learn from making kimchi is that, you know, when you make kimchi, it's almost always that you have to salt the vegetables first, right? So the reason is that you sprinkle the vegetable with lots of salt, coarse salt, so that you draw out the vegetable juice first, right? Then you squeeze the juice out, and you rinse a little, and then you start seasoning. Because that way the vegetables will stay crunchier for a longer period of time, right? So like think about salad, right? Like there's like a fresh, you know, greens, all kinds of vegetables, and as soon as you put the dressing in, you know, it starts to wilt, and it will ooze out water that will dilute the salad dressing, right? So think of this, the salting, as a pre-treatment for the vegetables, right? So you do that for cucumber, slices of cucumber, salt it, let it sweat it out. You know, it takes like 10 to 20 minutes, and then squeeze it out, little rinsing, so that it's not really too salty. And then you add just garlic, scallion, a little bit of vinegar. You don't need to salt it here because it's already been salted in the treatment stage. And then if you have Korean red pepper flakes, gochugaru, then you add them for spicy heat. But you know, just by doing that, you will, you know, you can enjoy that Korean cucumber dish, you know, really crunchy. And it can be a Korean banchan. You can have it with rice, or you know, you can mix it in your salad and make that really crunchy condiment. And you can put it on a sandwich too, right? So so I think like learning to cook is always a great way to expand, you know, what you can do in the kitchen, but also you know, learning to cook Korean food. And you know, it doesn't have to be like you have to eat it with rice and Korean soup. Like it doesn't, you don't have to make a whole complete Korean meal. You can use it however you want it, right?
So you can apply Korean techniques to like your everyday meals. Right. Exactly. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Korean cuisine, I think.
Right. So
that's a good one.
I will have you know, a lot of recipes, Korean vegetarian vegan recipes in my book, if anyone's interested. So it'll be on Amazon and Apple, Kobo. So
perfect. You know what? I think we should, if you want. So I still have like 5 or 6 classes left until November. Maybe we should do a cooking class together, like simple things. What about that?
Let's get back to that.
Not now, obviously. Like we can think about it. We can think about it, but because you know, what I want to do with the remaining classes is that I want to offer people a whole different like thing, you know, because I do have a lot of recipes to like cook and show them, but you know, I have like 6 classes left, and I want them to know how bright, how flexible Korean cooking is, that you don't have to be a pro to make a Korean thing, basically.
Right.
Because people have no idea of what Korean food is, they automatically think it's a difficult thing, to make.
Right. So I think when you don't know, it's sort of daunting to. I grew up with Korean food. I make Korean food every day, right? So when I have a hard time understanding why someone else would have a hard time understanding Korean food, I put myself into, okay, so what do I, like, how do I cook Indian food? Because Indian food to me is always a mystery. I enjoy it very much, but if you tell me all kinds of different spices, and I think I know like a couple of spices that I'm very familiar with, but then after that, it's like, oh my God, it's like over my head, right? So I think that if you put yourself in a position where it's like something is just completely over your head, then okay, now I understand. When it's like, when you don't see this, or when you don't, face this every day, although you're really interested and you like it, it's sort of like, oh, there's like, oh my God, I have to overcome this like little hurdle, right?
Exactly. Do you have like any advice for like the people that are trying to make Korean food at home? Do you have any advice like they should follow? Because that's a really important thing you said. People don't cook or have no idea how it tastes because it's new to them, so they just don't make it, or they think it's not what it's supposed to be. I'm trying to break that thinking, but do you have any advice for them and for me as well? Like, what should they look for when they are cooking Korean food for the first time, so I can basically like, sort of make them understand?
I think just to have fun with it. I know, it's been said many times before, have fun with it and season it right. As in, like, season it so that when you eat it, it should taste good. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. And, like, for most Korean dishes, people like it because it tastes good, right? You might have preference over something spicier or not. That's always manageable. You can put a little more or less of the spicy gochujang or gochugaru, the red pepper flakes. But at the end of the day, I think just, try different things. And nowadays there are so many resources available, and sometimes it could be information overload because there is so much you don't know what is more of an authentic recipe or method over, like someone just made it up, because I see both all the time, right? But even for Koreans, it could be a lot of times it's a home recipe. So it was right in one household for the longest time. But when you ask some other Koreans, it could be, it's like, okay, I find the similarities, but we did it different way. Right?
Exactly. I think Korean food has like this thing called sonmat. It's so hard to it was hard for me to understand in the beginning, because when I finished culinary school, I was like, everything has a recipe, and it turns out that not really, it's if the person who's eating it likes it, that's basically it.
Right.
I think that's one thing Korean food has. The fact that you don't really need a recipe, or that not all the recipes or one recipe is the correct one, I think I think it's really ambiguous on the good way.
When you see a dish with like a main ingredient that's something you're not familiar with, you can look up for information. And also like you found something that you want to try, but that's not available seasonally, right? Then you don't have to stick to that one main ingredient. Like I said, it could be beef or it could be vegetables. It could be chicken or it could be fish, right? But also, let's say like that's the only thing I can think of right now, like spinach, right? I mean, spinach is like one of the most common ingredients that's available everywhere, like all the time, right? Let's say that wasn't the case, right? It's only available in one season. You can't get it right now. Try to find what other like delicate green leafed vegetable you can find and apply the same recipe to that vegetable, like something different, right? So if it works, most likely it will, because Korean dishes are not that like rigid, right? You can apply the same recipe to different ingredients. So that's why I encourage using different ingredients and using local seasonal ingredients. So I think just I know when someone told me to have fun with something that I'm not familiar with, it's like, right? But I think it's just relax and have fun and season it to your liking.
Exactly. I think that's one thing that happened to the first Korean immigrants here. Obviously they wanted to make kimchi, but there was no pechu, so they relied on 양배추, like just regular cabbage, and it turned out to be the 양배추 kimchi already existed. Just cabbage kimchi already existed in Korea. So they were like, okay, if we can have like the regular kimchi, we just have another type of kimchi, or like with cucumbers. And it's like, at the end of the day, we may not be eating that like pechu kimchi, but we are still having kimchi, and it's still good, and it's still Korean, and we still have kimchi at the table, So it's.
I think a long time ago, it also happened in the US too. They started making kimchi with cabbage, and no matter where it goes, the cuisine doesn't stay the same, right? Like Korean cuisine in Korea today is different from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, right? Of course, it's gonna be localized when it goes overseas to their climate, to different cultures and local ingredients and local practices. So I don't think there is any harm in changing things up and trying. And I think Korean cuisine kind of came to be what it is because people worked with what they had.
Exactly. Yeah, we adapted. That's one thing Koreans do really well. We adapt.
Right, exactly. It goes back to adapting.
We adapt.
One last thing, during this Korean Food Festival week, I hope a lot of people try a different Korean restaurant and enjoy the Korean food that they know they enjoy, but also something different, something they've never ordered before, they've never tasted before. And I think it's always fun to explore different dishes and different cuisines. So I hope everyone enjoys Korean food during this festival period.
La sexta edición de la Semana de la Gastronomía Coreana, ¿sí? Hay 32 restaurantes que están participando. Conózcanlos, prueben todas las diferentes variedades que ofrecen los restaurantes. Prueben, porque realmente esa es la forma de conocer, que es todo lo que estuvimos hablando. Es también la forma de entender que la cocina coreana no es algo muy complejo, sino que es básicamente lo que te hace sentir bien, ¿sí? Ese es el mensaje que queremos dar. Todo lo que es la comida y los restaurantes, van a haber eventos todos los días, hay un concurso de gastronomía coreana, hay diferentes eventos todos los días realmente. También vamos a tener un masterclass como siempre los sábados. Nada, disfruten, conozcan y prueben, que es la mejor forma de conocer todo esto. Adiós.